Hello and welcome to my review of Fairy Tail, the new RPG from Guts and Koei Tecmo, who sent me a code so I could bring you guys this review. This is an RPG that follows events and characters from the Fairy Tail show, covering the entirety of the Grand Magic Games and Tartaros arcs. So not a great game if you're not familiar with Fairy Tail already, since it picks up in the middle of the show, but at the same time, the perfect arc for an RPG where you have to build your guild from the ground up. My name is Globku and this is Fairy Tail. In Fairy Tail, our heroes are attacked by a mighty dragon and forced to create this high-level magic shield that ends up trapping them for 7 years in a time bubble. When they come out of it, what was once the strongest guild in Fiore now lies in ruins, and this is the perfect setting for an RPG. Build your guild back from the ground up to the #1 spot once again. In this universe, magic guilds have a rank associated with them, from D rank to S rank guilds. People come to your guild with requests that vary in difficulty or danger, and as you build up your guild, you'll get more and more of these requests. Building up your guild is one of the central points of Fairy Tail. There are many systems to build up your guild that slowly unlock over time. One of these systems is upgrading your guild's facilities. By gathering materials and paying some money, you can upgrade your store, your lab, your material storage, etc. Each one of these has their own bonuses to use in and outside of combat. The store, for instance, lets you buy more powerful items as you upgrade it. The lab is where you can craft these gems called lacrima that have unique effects that you can equip on your characters. The storeroom gives you random items after each fight. The library makes it so everyone levels up and not just the members in combat in your party, and upgrading each facility increases your guild rank. You can also complete requests that are posted on the request board. These are essentially side missions. Some of them have cutscenes, others are a bit more straightforward. And while they each require different team members to tackle them in their own setting, the activities in these missions usually boil down to traveling, gathering, and combat. Traveling in this world is pretty good. There are a few different areas separated by loading screens, and you can fast travel anywhere. The loading screens are super fast, making traveling in and out of the guild hall very convenient. Once you travel into an area, you'll find these shiny gems on the ground. You can pick these up for upgrading your guild, for creating new lacrima, or to complete other small side quests. There are a few different areas with different vibes like forests and beaches, but nothing too different as far as gameplay goes. All these missions are very well tracked on the map. It's always very obvious what you need to do and where you need to go, and the objectives are usually fairly simple, which gives Fairy Tail this very light RPG vibe. Despite the amount of systems and activities you can do to increase your guild rank, everything can be done at your own pace, and it's perfectly spelled out for you. And then we have combat. In these areas you'll find enemies roaming, which you can try to attack to initiate combat with a speed buff. There are no random encounters in this game, you can always see when you're about to fight. Combat uses a traditional turn-based system, but enemies are arranged on this grid, and each attack you have will affect different areas on the grid. Your characters are not displayed on a grid, so you don't have to worry about your character placement. All you need to do is choose the most appropriate attack for each situation, and while I love the idea, the game doesn't do enough with it. It's a novel idea when you first start, but over time it gets a bit old as it doesn't innovate much. Enemies have certain elemental strengths and weaknesses, which also lends itself perfectly for Fairy Tail, since most characters have an elemental affinity, so choosing which characters you take into battle could be very significant, except these weaknesses and resistances don't affect attacks as much as they should. For instance, you could have an enemy that's weak to ice, but Natsu can still deal more damage with his fire attacks than Gray with his ice attacks, because the character has a higher attack stat. So instead of strategizing, the game encourages you to brute force your way through most encounters, offering very little challenge through most of it. Even if you bump up the difficulty, what that does is make enemies more spongy, which makes fights longer but not necessarily harder. Characters even have unique gimmicks. Gajil, for instance, has a chance to crit enemies if they are affected by a status ailment. Erza gets really powerful when she's below 50% health, and all of these are good ideas, but it ends up being meaningless since you pretty much have the strong characters and the weak characters. And the strong characters will always deal more damage no matter the elemental weakness, no matter the gimmick. Plus, as you fight, you build up this special meter where all of your characters chain moves together that hit the entire board, and this can easily clear most encounters, regardless of the enemies that are in it or their levels. And it's not like I built Natsu to be stronger, that's just the way the character is. There's no customization when it comes to stats. Characters level up and their stats increase without you dictating where to put points. The only place where you can customize characters is with the Lacrima system, and even then your customization is very limited. Visually, your characters can also be customized with a few preset outfits, but the game decides who is strong and who is not, and there's not much you can do to change it other than leveling up your characters and brute forcing your way through. The grid system does present itself as an interesting gimmick, one that's exciting to engage with at first, but it loses its charm over time simply because Fairy Tail is built as a very casual RPG. It doesn't punish you for taking the wrong characters into battle, it doesn't punish you for choosing the wrong element. If you're good enough at healing your characters when they need it, you can easily clear encounters with enemies that are 20 levels above you. And while this lack of challenge isn't necessarily a necessity, not every game needs to be hard and punishing. When you're playing an RPG for 20 to 30 hours, a little challenge goes a long way in keeping the player engaged. Part of what makes the grid system and the whole combat system work for the first few hours is the fact that you unlock a lot of these systems while playing the story, slowly introducing you to all of it. So as you get new systems to juggle, along with the freedom of increasing your guild rank in any way you feel like, it's satisfying to see the meters go up. But the story missions themselves are easily the weakest part of this game. I should preface this by saying that I'm not a fan of Fairy Tail. I have tried watching it 3 times, always ended up dropping it. And playing this game only confirmed that Fairy Tail as a show is simply not for me. I don't like the way the show constantly betrays all logic and breaks its own rules. It simultaneously builds up enemies as all-powerful only to break them down in the next scene for no reason other than the good guys must win. Paired up with the constant and gratuitous fan service, it's simply a show that I can't get into. So obviously playing through the story missions wasn't a pleasant experience for me, but if you are a fan of Fairy Tail, this probably won't bother you as much, because that's probably part of the reason why you like the show. But even if you are a fan, the game is also not a great way of reliving these arcs. You may have seen a few of these cutscenes that look really good in my opinion, but they're very few and far between. Most of the cutscenes have this in-engine look with very low quality of animation. And some of the story cutscenes aren't even voiced, which is okay, it's not a deal breaker, but what's not okay is random characters not having a voice in the middle of a voiced cutscene. This happens a lot during the entire game, and it's always jarring when it does happen. Also, because I know some of you guys are gonna ask, this game has Japanese voices with English subs and nothing else, no English dub option. In fact, I think they should have spent more time doing some more voice work on the Japanese side of things, because the voice lines for each attack are always the same, voice lines for picking up items are always the same, and it gets old really fast. There's also a moment at the end of the Grand Magic Games arc where the game locks you in a story mission for about 2 to 3 hours, and that was easily the worst time I've had with the entire game, because I was enjoying my time while having all of these systems to engage with. I was leveling up my guild, upgrading facilities, leveling up my characters. There's a good sense of progression this game provides with all of its systems. It's got enough meters that keep building up, so as a light casual RPG, it is very competent. Even if it's not the most innovative, it was definitely entertaining enough, and I'll honestly try to get the platinum trophy for this at some point. But when the game took control away from me to play that 3-hour story sequence, I felt like putting it down. It felt like the game was trying to do this big cinematic story quest sequence, but it absolutely did not have the budget to do that. And like I said before, this is not a great game if you're already into Fairy Tail, because you're gonna drop in the middle of this world with no idea of what a lot of these characters are about. And if you've already watched it, the game here is forcing you to sit through these same moments, but with low budget cutscenes without any special treatment. It's like watching the anime again, only much worse. As we get past that, the game introduces even more systems that further trivialize its RPG nature and really start to show the game's limitations. The mission structure remains the same, and at this point you've been playing for 15 hours and it starts to age pretty badly, and they give you this new system called Link Hunt, with which at any point you can summon a bunch of enemies to fight anywhere you'd like, which completely trivializes leveling up because you can get crazy amounts of experience from it. Fights also become longer and longer, not because they're getting harder, but because enemies become spongier. Difficulty in Fairy Tail does nothing but prolong fights. And even if it was more challenging, there's not a lot you could do to strategize around it, because each character's gimmick and the elemental strengths and weaknesses simply aren't strong enough. So other than leveling up and brute forcing your way through, there's not a lot of strategy to it. The game took me around 24 hours to beat, and that's while doing a decent amount of side content, but not being a completionist, because you can quickly become over-leveled for the story missions, and I didn't want to do that. After that, I had another 3 hours for the epilogue, and after the epilogue I played another 3 hours doing post-game content. And the game doesn't really change much in the post-game, but I get to do what I liked best about the whole experience: leveling up my characters, bringing my guild up in the ranks, and maxing out every meter I can. With all that said, it's time to score this game. If you're new here, we use letters as our review scores. F and E are the bad games, D and C are okay, B and A are the good games, and this is my score for Fairy Tail.
この世界には絶対的に抗えないものがある。この時代は終わる。さよなら。
Outside of story missions, nothing this game does is bad, but other than the grid system, it also doesn't innovate or differentiate itself from any other RPG out there. It's a fairly competent, light and casual RPG, perfect for mindlessly spending time leveling up different meters, done with what looks like a very limited budget. And that's okay, not every game needs to be of AAA quality, but the game is definitely priced as a AAA game, which makes it very hard to recommend given the amount of amazing RPGs you could get for that price. This is a clear case of waiting for a sale if you really want to get it, but that's only my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. If you've played this game, go ahead and give it your personal score in the comments. That way, if someone is wondering whether they should buy it or not only do they have my opinion, they can read yours as well. And as always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Globku and I'll see you next time. Bye!